Sure.
What do you think are the most beneficial steps an org can take to modernize their IT? And again, you can look at that, in the lens of a global pandemic. I'm just curious what your thoughts would be.
So I think of uh, the use of technology in one very specific way, which is that if you take the key business processes or the key processes of any given business, typically the ones that face customers and consumers, but also those that face employees, shareholders, and other stakeholders, uh, technology that allows you to have the best business processes and best defined by the fastest and the most defect free, those two, for the least amount of tech money devoted to technology, are the best run companies. So let me say it again. If you've got business processes facing customers, consumers, employees, shareholders, stakeholders of all types, and you've got business processes that are the fastest and the most defect free, and you as a company have spent the least amount of money on technology to get that done, you are the most successful companies. Now, it's not often easy to spend a little amount of technology and get perfect business processes.
Yep.
There's a concept called straight through processing that many financial service companies use to define what percent of all, say, customer and consumer interactions are done completely digitally without any human intervention whatsoever.
Hmm.
And clearly, the companies that are able to have the most digitally intensive businesses, meaning that require the least amount of human intervention, are those that delight the customers and consumers the most, and those that drive the greatest productivity inside the company as well. So it's a theoretical statement, clearly, but that is the framework with which one should look at all technology investments. Is, are you allowing straight through processing? Are you allowing the best cycle time in front of stakeholders with the least amount of defects?
Agreed.
There's a second perspective.
I would
Sorry.
add one small thing in there that is a thread that runs through all of that, especially through straight through processing.
Yep.
Security. You can't compromise it.
So that was exactly what Craig, you read my
Nice.
mind. That was the second thing, which is obviously all of this has to be incredibly secure. And there's a place where JumpCloud obviously shines. But there's a view, at least that I have and others have, as to how the whole security approach will change and is already in the process of changing. And many people have different names for it. Some call it domainless. I know you do. Others call it zero trust. But there's a view that as much effort as you put on controlling the perimeter, controlling access to applications, detecting, running software that detects inappropriate or surprising things going on in the network, that even with all that, companies get breached. And that at its core, what is the right way to think about security, and we are gradually getting to the point where we as a technology community can do this, is to get to the point where your data, all of the permissions and all of the policies are at the data level, and then all of the validation of Greg coming in and saying Greg is who he says he is, that is being done equally effectively. And so if Greg is the only person that is allowed to decrypt certain data, then the only thing you need to do is be sure that when Greg says he's Greg, that he is in fact Greg. And whether that's 2-factor authentication, 3-factor authentication, 5-factor authentication, and we can talk about what that means, that that is the ultimate security. Is that the policies are established at the data level in terms of who can do what with the data, and then guaranteeing that you are who you say you are is the second piece of it.
Absolutely. You hit sort of a passion point of mine. Let me kind of nudge at the concept that you brought up, which is the domainless enterprise.
Yep.
Obviously, this is a term that JumpCloud has been using for time ad infinitum. Any moment I get a chance to address a public crowd in some capacity, I'm talking about the ways that the modern world has effectively, scuttled the old way of thinking. And to get very specific on that, I liken the domainless enterprise to sort of the following visual image. If you could, this is a podcast, so people close your eyes and you can imagine this. Imagine your office setting in 1993 or 4, and you walked into that office. There's a brick and mortar. You may or may not have had a key card to get into that office space. You proceeded to walk directly to your desk, a workstation, if you will. And note that word. This comes back, from the age of the Industrial Revolution, when workers walked up to their workstation, which was typically a lathe. You just translate that into a modern digital sense, and you have a computer sitting in front of you, which, guess what, was tethered through an Ethernet to some central location sitting there in your brick and mortar office, that gave you access to stuff, the world of the quote domain controller. Now, fast forward that mental visual image, and imagine you tear down all the walls of that physicality, and you as an employee were able to pick up that big machine and walk to any place on earth with it, and with no office around you, on a mountaintop, and start to compute. That's the domainless enterprise. That is our current reality. So let's let's focus in that vein. When we're sort of seeing companies move in this direction, obviously there's a plethora of different software vendors. I think we contribute to it. There's architectures like Zero Trust and Beyond Corp. You mentioned Zero Trust before. How are you seeing companies sort of evolve this? Basically, it's a two-part question, Gary. One is, what's holding them back? Two, we're hearing a forcing function of you can't work in an office anymore because it may kill somebody. What do companies need to do to evolve to get to the domainless enterprise faster?
Sure. So I think what's going on right now is parallel efforts, where certainly large and medium-sized enterprises are still employing perimeter protections, are still doing endpoint detection and response, and are still doing network detection. Some do, some don't. While at the same time, they are beginning to deploy data policies. And that is a newer concept. But the companies that have been deploying that, and there are many companies that allow you to deploy a data policy in your environment, as they use those tools to do this, they have not shut down perimeter controls, nor application controls, nor endpoint controls, nor network controls. And so it's going to take, I would think, 5 to 10 years before people are comfortable with strictly using data policies and multi-factor authentication as the way to go.
Got it. Yeah, it's sort of, I mentioned the sort of brick and mortar where the key card was the verification factor to get into your actual building. This is where the criticality of multi-factor 2, 3, 4, to your point, 5-factor authentication absolutely has to come into play to verify that, Gary is who he is, Greg is who he is, and in effect, allow the policies to do their work to ensure Gary only gets what Gary, has access to.
And just so we're clear on this multi-factor, it's not like we have to put in 5 different passwords. There are, as you know, much better than I do, there are so many ways to authenticate someone where he or she does not even know it, whether or not it's where you are when you're logging in. It's the way you hit your keys, your keystrokes. It's your grammar. I mean, there are any number of ways in which one can be authenticated without it being a hassle to the user.
That's right. I mean, we're always trying to strike that balance as security engineers between security and convenience. It's that razor's edge. And you're absolutely correct. I think the new generation of multi-factor passwordless authentication, any ways where, to me, honestly, entering in a 6-digit code, not that big of a deal. But my God, it's the world's worst thing for some employees. It's too hard for them to do that.
But as we do more and more video conferencing, and everyone has cameras on their work, facial recognition. We've already seen that with mobile devices. Facial recognition will be one of the easier factors of authentication.
Absolutely correct. Walk up to your machine, which Apple has sort of really cornered the market on, and guess what? You're in. Therein lies the challenges. This is actually a perfect segue into our final segment here, Gary, which is transitioning from the domainless enterprise to we're going to traverse into even more specific territory, devices.